Throughout the Second World War, the Wehrmacht and German army would rampage across many different lands and were involved in large numbers of war crimes. At the end of the conflict, only a small percentage of those beasts were ever brought to trial for their crimes, and some did go to the gallows for their actions. But following advancements made by the German army, there would be an SS paramilitary death squad that would follow, and they would arrange the slaughter of civilians. The Einsatzgruppe A, as they were known, were responsible for the murder of millions of people across occupied lands. They would force these victims to dig their own graves before executioners shot them dead. It was true horror, and one man who was in command of one of these death squads was Franz Walter Stahlecker. His role in the war was horrific, and he oversaw the most murderous of the 4 death squads who were working in German-occupied Eastern Europe. But in March 1942, Stahlecker succumbed to an injury he had sustained when he was attacked by Soviet partisans. Join us today as we look at the slaughter of the Einsatzgruppe commander, and as always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Franz Walter Stahlecker was born on the 10th of October 1900 into a rather wealthy family. His father was a pastor and a priest, and also a senior figure in local universities. Stahlecker, as a young man, enlisted inside of the German military, and he would briefly serve in this during the First World War. But then, following the end of the conflict, he became a member of a prominent anti-Semitic German organisation known as the Deutsche Völkischer Schutz- und Trutzbund. He was clearly a dangerous man, but then he went to university and actually gained a doctorate of law at the age of 27. Stahlecker did marry, and his wife would give birth to 4 children, but on the 1st of May 1932, he joined the Nazi Party and also joined the SS. There were many other members who had joined a lot earlier, but in May 1933 he became the Deputy Director of the Political Office of the Württemberg State Police. Inside of the SS and Nazi hierarchy, Stahlecker was seen as a man who could be trusted and someone who would be loyal to the policies of Hitler and his government. Because of this, he was given a lot of power early on in his Nazi career, and he in 1934 became the head of the Gestapo in the Württemberg state, and he was also a member of staff inside the main head office of the SD, the Sicherheitsdienst. This was a Nazi intelligence service who worked closely with the SS, and their first director was Reinhard Heydrich, who would become known as a Butcher of Prague for his actions during the Second World War. The SD would try to sniff out any dissenters or enemies of the Nazi leadership. They would torture and execute these quickly, as they would want to make sure that resistance did not spread. The SD was an information gathering agency, and they would often pass this on to the Gestapo, who would then arrest and take possession of people. Stahlecker was rising quickly, and he became the head of the Gestapo in Breslau in May 1937, and following the annexation of Austria, he would become the SD chief for the Vienna district. Further promotions came, and he became an inspector of security police in Austria, and would then also be involved in anti-Semitic policies in the land, serving under Adolf Eichmann. He would also be involved in deportations and arrests of hundreds of people, but Stahlecker, it was clear, would be a man who some would be weary of because of his sharp rise to power. For example, Reinhard Heydrich, Himmler's number 2, even had differences of opinions with him. Heydrich would move Stahlecker to the Foreign Office, and he would serve as the commander of the security police and the SD in the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, inside of Czechoslovakia. He continued to serve all over German-occupied lands during the Second World War, and Stahlecker was sent to Norway, and he would be placed in charge of a feared execution squad known as the Einsatzgruppe. Specifically, he was given control of Einsatzgruppe A, and he served as the commanding officer of this. The Einsatzgruppe were the death squads deployed by the Nazis during the Second World War, who would slaughter millions through mostly shooting inside of occupied lands. The Einsatzgruppe were mostly involved in the slaughter of the cultural elite in Poland and members of the priesthood, and they murdered civilians and would slaughter Jews, Soviets and Romani people, as they would be accused of being partisans across Eastern Europe, as well as those who were accused of being partisans across Eastern Europe. Heinrich Himmler and Heydrich were in control over all, but specifically commanders of different units were responsible for their men. It's believed that between 1941 and 1945 that the Einsatzgruppe, through mostly shooting, murdered more than 2 million people during the war, including 1.3 million Jews. The killing process was almost the same every time. Following the Wehrmacht making advancements, the death squads would arrive in a settlement and gather everyone together. People would be sorted, and then the victims would be forced to dig their own graves inside of the village or at the edge of it. These pits would be very deep, and then following them being dug, people were brought to the execution site. They were then told to bring their belongings, which would be stolen by the Nazis, and the victims were also told to undress. Following this, people were driven into the death pits in groups, before executioners, either on the edge of the pit with their rifles, would shoot them, or inside of the pit, executioners with their pistols would shoot the victims in the neck or in the back of the head. It was a horrific operation, and there are many examples of these mass graves that have still not been discovered today. Often the Einsatzgruppe A also carried out public hangings to strike fear into the hearts of those local people to not get involved in resistance activities. Franz Walter Stahlecker, as mentioned, commanded Einsatzgruppe A, and he would carry out the ruthless slaughter of thousands, and was motivated by further promotion and advancement in his career inside of the Reich Security Main Office. He was driven by power, and in June 1941, his unit followed the German Army Group North and served inside of Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, and all areas of the Soviet Union up to Leningrad. They would carry out the mass murder with brutality, but Stahlecker would coldly report on his actions, and his words in the report, which were penned on the 15th of October 1941, were harrowing. He wrote, "Considering that the population of the Baltic countries had suffered very heavily under the government of Bolshevism, whilst they were incorporated into the Soviet Union, it was to be expected that after the liberation from that foreign government, they would render harmless most of the enemies left behind after the retreat of the Red Army. It was the duty of the security police to set in motion these self-cleansing movements and to direct them into the correct channels in order to accomplish the purpose of cleansing operations as quickly as possible. It was no less important, in view of the future, to establish the unshakable and provable fact that the liberated populations themselves took the most severe measures against the Bolshevists quite on their own, so that the direction by German authorities could not be found. In Lithuania, this was achieved for the first time by partisan activities in Kano. To our surprise, it was not easy at first to set in motion an extensive pogrom. Klimatis, the leader of the partisan unit mentioned above, who was used for this purpose primarily, succeeded in starting a pogrom on the basis of advice given to him by small advancing detachments acting in Kono, and in such a way that no German order or German instigation was noticed from the outside. During the first pogrom, on the night of the 25th to 26th of June, the Lithuanian partisans did away with more than 1,500 Jews, set fire to several synagogues or destroyed them by other means, and burned down a Jewish dwelling district containing about 60 houses. During the following night, around 2,300 Jews were made harmless in a similar way. Over time, his Einsatzgruppe became the deadliest of the Nazi death squads which were deployed, and he would report in winter 1941 that his unit had murdered 249,420 Jews. And this does not include the other prisoners of war and Soviets in this. Because of his actions, he was made the commander of the security police and the SD of Reich Commissariat Ostland, which included the countries and territories of Belarus, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. But because of his destructive work, the Soviet partisans and members of the resistance would target high-ranking German officials and officers, and they were keen to claim the lives of those who had carried out slaughter. Walter Stahlecker was a wanted man, and on the 22nd of March 1942, he would be wounded in action after a battle with Soviet partisans near to Krasnogvardietsk in the Soviet Union. There is some debate as to what happened specifically during his final moments and during the shootout. He was a very senior member of the SS, was a commander, so for him to be on the front lines facing the enemy is unlikely, which leads us to the conclusion that Stahlecker may have been ambushed by partisans, which is how resistance groups like to operate. They would try to pick off smaller groups of Germans rather than face them in all-out battles, but he was a prime target for the partisans. During the fighting, Stahlecker was shot in the leg and had a rather severe wound, and following sustaining the wound, he was quickly taken back to a German hospital train for his injuries to be treated. However, the injury was so severe that he would never recover, and shortly after getting into the train, he died of his injuries. He had suffered a huge hemorrhage as his main artery was torn, and medical care in Riga was unable to help, but on the train back to his family, he allegedly bled to death. The body of Stahlecker was taken to Prague, and there was a huge Nazi funeral for him, in which Reinhard Heydrich attended. Heydrich too would be killed that very same year within 3 months. But Franz Walter Stahlecker commanded Einsatzgruppe A, and he would be responsible for the slaughter of over 250,000 people, and he was a power-hungry Nazi who wanted to please Himmler and Hitler. He was a man trusted by the head of the SS to carry out the ruthless slaughter of thousands across German-occupied lands, but he would meet his fate against the Soviet partisans. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.